maybe?
Yes, we can see it.
Cool. So I am so stoked to be talking about this. I'm so stoked to be able to attend all these days. This has just exceeded all expectations. I'm just really, really happy. So when Sarah and I decided to organize this conference, we heard Christian's call about how he was not getting into the American conferences and kind of just how fucked up my country is. As I'm sure you all can probably agree. So that's why we were just super stoked to bring something like this to you all. I had the good fortune of being able to go to Kenya earlier this year, and I mean it was just it was a dream to be able to do that. And so I'm really excited that we're going to be able to come out there next year for the next version of Concatenate to come talk to you all in person and see your bright smiling faces. So without further ado, I'm going to start talking about Webpack, which I think of all the speakers that have spoken today, I think I know the most about Webpack. In fact, I don't think it's even controversial. And also, I think probably the best beard of any of the speakers, except maybe Jem. Jem would probably beat me, but besides Jem. Okay, so 10 kilobytes or bust. Let's talk about Webpack and Babel. I work for this little tiny startup. You might have never heard of them. They're called Azure. It's kind of, or Microsoft, as they're also known. Still pretty underground. So I do this little thing called Front-End Happy Hour as well. I do it with Jem, actually. Sarah's been on a couple times. Shirley's been on. So definitely check out Front-End Happy Hour. It's a cool podcast. And one of our lovely, lovely sponsors, Front-End Masters, you'll see some of my videos up there as well. And like previously mentioned, before Microsoft, I was at LinkedIn, Netflix, and Reddit. I like to say that my first two companies, my entire job was to waste your time. Now my job is to save you time. Kind of trying to hope to balance those things out. I live in Seattle right now. I'm originally from a small place called Salt Lake City, and I lived in Italy for a couple of years. So if any of you are Juventus fans, go Juve. And I saw this quote on the internet a while ago from Internet Person. It says, "I only ask that frameworks put warnings on their products when they can't be accessible, e.g. this site best viewed with a high net worth." Now, I both agree with the fundamental premise of this tweet that we should all be really careful about what we put into our websites because, as I'm sure you know, that if you try and load a really heavy page on your cell phone, it doesn't work super well. And so if you're out somewhere in like, the middle of the Serengeti or like for me, like I was traveling on data in the middle of Masai Mara in Kenya, and that data is really, really expensive. So if you can't load the page, then that really sucks. And so we have to be really cautious of what kind of things we're putting into our websites. So web performance is a really big point of emphasis for me, but at the same time, I really don't like this because this guy's kind of being a jerk. So, take it for what it's worth. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all trying our best, right? Like no one's going to work and saying like, I don't want to make this accessible for people. No one's actually like evilly trying to make, put more things into their website. Like at the end of the day, we're all just trying to survive, right? Like whether that's us not trying to get fired, whether that's us just trying to ship features, or whether that's our startup just trying not to fold. We're all just trying to survive. So not every app needs to work on 2G on a low powered phone. And that's up to you to know your audience. Like for all of your websites, I hope you all are looking at your analytics on a pretty regular basis. I'd say at least once a week would be pretty ideal, just so you can know what kind of browsers they're using, what kind of phone speeds they have, what kind of operating systems they have, like all those kind of various things that can kind of paint you a picture. It's like if you have a bunch of people accessing your site on something like Internet Explorer, then you need to be targeting more that browser. But if no one's accessing them on any form of Internet Explorer, then don't build your website for it. So that's what I want to say is like you really need to know who's visiting your website. Also know that you might be precluding your people from visiting your website. In your site on Internet Explorer and it doesn't work, then I'm just not going to go there anymore, right? Because I just knew it doesn't work. So you have to kind of balance that factor as well. So that's it. We're going to be talking about 2G and low power devices today. So sorry, that's what I wanted to talk about. So just to get some numbers in front of you, these are what I'm talking about. Whoops, there we go. Okay. So 2G is 14 kilobytes. 3G, CDMA is the technology that we use in America. I think you might use it, I'm not sure. Anyway, that's about 144 kilobits per second. 4G is 100,000 kilobits per second, which, as a funny side note, I had faster and cheaper internet, faster and cheaper 4G in Nairobi than I did in San Francisco. So there's a lot of stuff that Africa's getting right that we're still screwing up here in America. And then the last thing is I just got this installed in my house, gigabit fiber, and it's fantastic. So that is 1,000,000 kilobits per second. So you can kind of see that there's a huge gradient there in terms of what kind of speeds you're going to be getting. How many of you have ever used one of these before? I have. This is a 56 kilobit per second modem. This is how I used to access the internet when I was a kid. My dad worked for IBM, so he brought one of these home pretty early, and this is how I surfed the internet and read up about the new Star Wars Episode 1 movie that was coming out, all that kind of stuff. So if you remember browsing the internet on one of those, 2G is slower than that. So just kind of like think about that for a second. For me, I remember like leaving up downloads overnight so that they would finish by the time I got back to the computer. And 2G is actually slower than that. And actually, it's actually worse than that because the internet's so bloated now. Like we're building these giant web pages that have megabytes of data, and sometimes we're just kind of phoning it in. We shouldn't do that. So I want to do a little bit of an experiment for you. This is LinkedIn.com. So remember, I used to work here, so I share partial blame for whatever you're about to see. I'm going to make all of you watch this load in 2G. So just the plain LinkedIn.com feed. So I'm going to start it now. By the way, everyone, put away your phones, put away your laptops. I want you to watch this. I want you to feel how painful this is. Okay? So we're at 11 seconds now, and still nothing is showing. Literally nothing is showing. 17 seconds, still nothing. 23 seconds, nothing. 25. Okay. At 28 seconds, we see the loading indicator. 36. Still nothing. We're still nothing at like 45. Okay, so about 38 seconds, we get first meaningful paint, right? Still can't really do anything. Like I can't see things that are like in my feed or anything like that. So still not great. Okay, we're at 55 seconds now. Still not done. I hope I'm painting a picture for you. Like if you're not paying attention to these things, you can end up with problems like this where like we're over a minute and it still hasn't finished yet. Still loading. Stuff underneath the fold, I think. So 2.3 megabytes took 1.3 minutes on 2G. Like that's real tough. Like of the people there in Lagos right now, how many of you would have waited this long? I can't see any hands, but I assume no one is raising their hand. Nope, put your hands down. Put your damn hands down. No one's gonna wait that long. Right? It's just too long. Like all of your clients are gonna bounce. So that's why it's really important to kind of be paying attention to this sort of thing. So now I wanna be fair, right? I loaded the desktop experience and LinkedIn has like a light experience for slower internet, but I just wanted to paint a picture here for you. Now, I wanna show you something. This one's is Treebo.com. I'm gonna be loading it on the exact same speed And I want you to kind of, pay attention to the difference here. Instantly paints, like within a second, and within about 7 seconds, you're about finished. And within about 12 seconds, you're totally done. Like, that is a stark difference, right? And this is not an ugly website. It's well designed, it's well thought out. These people just had like a really big attention to loading well, because this is kind of their core clientele. Tribo, I believe, is a discount motel chain in India. So they're worried about those kind of consumers. So I just want to paint a picture for you that if this is a competition and Asia and Africa are, Asia and Africa are kicking Silicon Valley's ass. Like, we're not doing super well over here, and you all have figured that out. That's why, like, I'm putting a huge bet into the future of African developers, of Asian developers, and all these kind of developers outside of our little bubble here in Silicon Valley, is because you all get this and we don't, right? And the most, like, we have the next billion users coming online, we have the next million developers coming online, and that's you all. Like, I think that's, you all are going to be leading the charge and going to be telling us what to do about this. And I'm super stoked about that. Okay, so hopefully you might feel a little bit bad about your website at this point. It's like, I wonder how fast my website loads. Like, some of my websites are still super slow. So I'm on that boat as well. In fact, when I go to fix these problems, I kind of feel like this most of the time. I have no idea what I'm doing. Just kind of like floating out in space, not really figuring out what to do. So I'm going to give you a bunch of tips. I don't have enough time to cover all of these, so my slides are already online. I'll tweet out the link. It's also at the end. It was at the beginning as well. So feel free to comb through these later. So I'll give you a whole group of tips of things that are really easy to do and things that are harder to do. So this one's obviously a lot harder, because if you're all building a website, you've already chosen your framework. So, just things to start thinking about for your next website. So definitely question your framework. So Preact, sorry, that's my dog. Luna, stop. Okay, so Preact, 3.5 kilobytes, and it takes about going to affect you. We're all the way down to Angular. Hold on. Okay, you can get all the way down into Angular. Angular is about 61 kilobytes, and that's going to take about 2 seconds to load. Like, that's a long time to wait just for the framework. That's not any of your code. That's not any other dependency. That's just waiting for your framework. Now, to be fair, Angular includes more things than Preact, so it's not a totally fair comparison, but if you include Angular in your project, it's just 2 seconds out the window. Another tip here, Babel preset ES 2015, that's what we all used to use when we were building applications. That's going away with Babel 7, which just hit release candidate yesterday. Go team Babel. We're now using preset env. So let's talk about what preset, we'll talk about preset env more in a second as well. But the basic idea is you can tell Babel's like, hey, I want to target these browsers. Make sure you only transpile the things to target those browsers. So you can even pin it to the last 2 major releases, which means that as more major releases come along, your code will transpile less and less code. I think that's always a good thing. As well as you can like say, I want this to target, Chrome 65 or something like that, and I'll, just transpile for that. Or you can even go as to Google Analytics, and it'll just do your user base. So it'll actually tailor it to what kind of users are accessing your site. So there's a bunch of cool things that preset env can do for you. Compile your code twice with Babel. This is actually something that I saw that the new Vue CLI 3.0 does. Like, that's amazing. That's groundbreaking. Basically, you compile it once for type equals modules, which is a new feature in the browsers, and only new browsers will download that, and you'll transpile everything else without that ES modules thing. There's a bunch of great blog posts out there, particularly from Chris Baxter and the Google teams, to check those out. Tree shaking. This is something that you might be hearing about But let's actually kind of explore what tree shaking is. Tree shaking is the idea that you're going to only include code that could potentially be run. So think about this in terms of you include this giant library and you only use one piece of it. You want to only include the piece that you use and you don't include anything else. In fact, let's look at an example of that. That would be something like Lodash, right? Lodash is all of us have used probably once or twice in their JavaScript development cycle, right? So this 2 lines of code require Lodash and then get Lodash. That is 73.3 kilobytes of code. That's not gzipped, by the way, but that just doing those 2 lines of code and including Lodash, that's a lot. Okay? By the way, this theme is Night Owl. That was done by our own Sarah Drasner, so definitely go check that out. We got a link down there at the bottom. And the font is Dank, which is one of our gold sponsors, which is also really, really cool. Anyway, back to what we were talking about. So looking at our preset env here, right? Look at this, particularly the line I want to draw your attention to is line 7, modules false. This is basically telling us, hey, Babel, leave all the modules alone, let Webpack handle this. Webpack or Rollup or any one of these. And what we can actually get out of that is we can change this code to be Lodash-ES, which is a repackaged Lodash for tree shaking specifically. And so now if I change this, this does exactly the same thing as the other one, but I went from going from 73.3 kilobytes to 11.1 kilobytes just by doing a little bit of tree shaking. Now, the part I want to call your attention to here is that this works really well for Lodash. Lodash is a utility belt of various methods that don't interact with each other, right? Like it has nothing to do with, I don't know, object.assign or something like that. Oh, by the way, for sure the best jersey at the World Cup was the Super Eagles, right? Like I don't feel like that's a controversial statement to say. Yeah, so I was definitely on Team Nigeria this World Cup. Okay, sorry. 11.1 kilobytes. Yeah, so I just wanted to show you what this looks like. So if this is what it looks like if you just include .get, right? Oh, what I was saying before is that this works really well for Lodash. If you try and do tree shaking with React, it doesn't work, right? Because with React, you use everything. You can't eliminate anything from React because React needs everything. Whereas we can eliminate things from Lodash because there's large parts of it that we don't need. In fact, here you can see what the get part looks like. But if I include everything in Lodash, it looks like this, right? Like that is stark. There is a lot of things that includes. So tree shaking is in fact no silver bullet. This is a visual pun. I think it's funny, but oftentimes people don't think I'm as funny as I think I am. So it's no silver bullet because you shouldn't really be tree shaking your own code because you shouldn't be including dead code anyway. And it's only going to save you from a couple of things like this Lodash type scenario. So don't rely on it too much. Let's talk about use built-ins. This is another new feature for Babel 7, the new version that just came out. So if I do use built-ins usage, what it's going to do is it's only going to include the polyfills that I need. If you notice, we'll look at a.js. If I do new promise and I'm in an environment that doesn't support promises, what it's going to do is it's only going to import the polyfill for promises and nothing else. So this is really useful if you need to use some of the polyfills and you don't want to include all of them. So that's really useful as well. Loose mode, this one's been around in Babel forever. This is something you can check out in your code right now. Loose mode is basically the idea that something like ES6 classes are really complicated. They interact with a lot of different features inside of JavaScript. So we don't need to include all of the edge cases, right? Most of the time we're just using classes like normal people, not like, not normal people. In fact, let's look at the difference here. On the right, you can see classes, the polyfill that, or rather how it's transpiled if we do loose mode. And on the left, you can see what it looks like if we do it not in loose mode. The one on the left covers a lot of edge cases that you're probably never going to hit. So that's why I would encourage you to check if you can use loose mode. If you're doing crazy things with classes, then you probably won't be able to do it. But if you're just doing normal everyday kind of React stuff with it, then you're probably going to be okay. So check out loose mode. I personally have been using it the entire time I've been using it. It's never been a problem for me. Build using Node-env equals production. This one's free. Just go check to make sure that you're doing it. Particularly with React, this is really important. Slack was famously shipping React in dev mode, which makes it slower, it makes it bigger, it just makes it all around bad. React includes a bunch of debugging features for you while you're in development mode, and then it takes all of them out when you're in production mode. So build using Node-env production, that's a really good one. Code splitting, the name of this talk is 10 kilobytes or bust. So the only way that you're going to get that low is by code splitting. Like 100%, you have to use something small like Preact, for example, and then you have to split everything else. And what you want to do is you want to identify the core parts that you need to load the first page load, and then defer everything else to be loaded afterwards. And then once that is loaded, then you want to use something like a service worker to go in and load all of your different code bundles before. So code splitting will help you get down to that 10 kilobyte magic margin. Source maps, don't include your source maps inline in production. That will more than quadruple your bundle size easily. So just make sure that you're not shipping source maps. I wish I didn't have to say this, but someone in that room in Lagos is doing this. So you all should go check. Scope hoisting, this is something pioneered by the Rollup team and kind of adapted to other things like Rollup and Parcel as well. So what they were calling this in Webpack is the module concatenation plugin, but I believe with the newest Webpack, it's actually just built in. The basic gist here with the scope hoisting part of it is you can see line 4 on the left, we have that Webpack require method 0. That's actually more expensive than it looks, and it's actually going to bring in helper so that helper can be called inside on line 7. Whereas if you do scope hoisting, you'll actually save some size, and you'll actually get a lot of performance benefit. Usually you're going to see more performance benefits rather than size benefits out of this. Let's see. So definitely check out we'll skip that next slide, but we're going to talk image for just a moment. So image skeletons are the idea that you're going to have images are one of the biggest parts of your website in terms of just raw page weight. Now, keep in mind that 10 kilobytes of image is not the same as 10 kilobytes of JavaScript. JavaScript is far more expensive. You have to process, parse, and execute. Images, you just download them and display them. So it's not quite the same, but nonetheless, you can actually save a bunch of space and time on images nonetheless. So the image on the right is the full fidelity image. The image in the middle is a SPG with 100 shapes. The image on the left is the one using 10 shapes. You can see the one in the middle is almost the same. The one on the left is abstractly so, but it would be an okay placeholder while you wait for the bigger image to download, right? And the one on the left is like a couple hundred bytes. The one in the middle, I think, is like 2 or 3 kilobytes. And the one on the right is probably going to be like 500 kilobytes or something like that. So this is a really cool way that you can put placeholder images or skeleton images while you're loading stuff on your site. I found this one particularly cool. They actually went and designed these SVGs by hand as placeholders while you wait for the bigger images to load. This would be great if you have like a stock photography or something like that where you're loading really, really big images. This is another just huge personal one of mine. You can actually animate them in, and then once the image loads, then you can load it in the background. I found this one really, really cool, especially because it's actually not really that hard to do, given the fact that it's not hard to animate SVG paths. So definitely check out that as well. You can see it down the bottom right. I have a code pen that I took that from. And here's just a couple other ones. Like you can do just the main color. You can do a placeholder image. You can do like a box. But the basic idea here is you want to defer loading images until after everything else that you need to load first. And this is a really good way of doing it. Blur up is a common way of doing it, especially on social networks. So just on an example website I was working with, I was able to shave almost 2 megabytes, or almost 3 megabytes rather, off of initial page load just by doing these kind of techniques. So here's just a summary of what we kind of talked about. Definitely look at the utility of investing in some of these things, like changing a framework's really expensive, but if you use something like image skeletons or the no scripts or code splitting or something like that, there are a little bit cheaper ways of getting some good web performance. Just wanted to give you some brief tips on doing functions, particularly with Microsoft Azure functions. The idea here is we want to reduce time to first byte. So you can do something like introduce a server timings API, and so you can actually see where you're losing time. In this particular case, you can see that MySQL is taking the most time. So definitely check out the server timings API, and this works really well with functions. Compress your responses. That's a big one. At LinkedIn, one of the first things I noticed when I went there is that we weren't gzipping our API responses. That's just free performance to do that. Check out using Brotli. It's another compression algorithm. You can see here with the US, we were actually able to get a decent amount of savings on our load time just by switching from gzip to Brotli. Not every browser supports it really well, but for example, IE doesn't support it, but beyond that, you can see now that Edge, Firefox, and Chrome and Safari on the latest versions are shipping it. So Brotli is another good one. Way to reduce cold start. There's a couple techniques you can do that. One of them is Azure Function Pack. It's fork Webpack to bundle things together for your functions to make them start faster. I'm going to leave the future one here is for you, so you can check it out afterwards. But lots of cool stuff coming. Prepack, for example, which will pre-pack all of your code together. It'll actually execute your code and leave you with the fundamental beginning of it. So if you look at the top one, you get hello world, and what you're left with at the end is hello world. Or it can even do things like the Fibonacci sequence. Definitely check that out. That is prepack.io. Disappearing frameworks, some cool stuff coming from Svelte and Angular and Glimmer. And thank you. Thank you all for listening. This was super fun.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions? We'll just take one question. One question.
Hi, Brian.
Hi.
Yeah, I really found the lecture to be very useful. But when using Webpack, there are times when you kind of have the production, the compressed production, how do I call it? Whatever. The compiled JS is quite large, and then you find Webpack complaining that perhaps you should split it. How is that really useful? Because I really don't get the importance. So I think maybe I'll need some clarification on that.
Sure. Yeah. No, happy to tell you about code splitting. So you're right that you're not really reducing how much code you're loading. Ultimately, you're going to load the same amount of code, right? The idea here is that you're going to load the most important code first. Display something to the user right away. So for example, that Treebo website, notice that it immediately popped up with something, right? So that you could start looking at the website, start evaluating what you want to do. Do I want to book a hotel? Do I want to look at what's available? You know, those kind of decisions in your head while they're still loading the things behind the scenes. So you're prioritizing the code that's going to be most useful to the user first. Then after that, in the background, you're loading everything else so that you can make everything work by the time they make that decision or by the time they scroll down to see something else. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense.
Cool.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you.